Dota 2 is, in my opinion, one of the modern marvels of game design in the 21st century. Perhaps a better measure of quality than anything I'm about to say here is the fact that at the time of me making this video, I've put over 3,000 hours into Dota 2 since I began playing it 3 years ago, yet I don't look back on that time spent with anything but fondness. Perhaps an even bigger indicator is the fact that I'm by no means in the minority of players who have averaged numbers like these. According to an article from 2015, 25% of those that own Dota 2 on Steam have played over 750 hours of the game. When you consider the fact that Dota is a completely free game and a large number of the player base are people that just download the game and barely play it at all, you'll realize how astounding that statistic is. In this video, we're going to attempt to dissect the game and figure out what makes it such a success and such an important achievement in modern game design. First of all, it's worth noting that Dota was never designed as a commercial product. From its start as a custom game from Warcraft 3's built-in level editor, Dota was developed and modified purely as a labor of love by people who wanted to play it. While the actual development of the game has always been in the hands of a few anonymous key individuals, the current one going under the alias IceFrog, a significant amount of the tweaks and additions came originally as suggestions from fans of the game on its official forums. This means that the priorities of those developing the game have always been, and will hopefully always continue to be, the same as those who are actually playing it. This is, perhaps surprisingly, something that is to my knowledge almost entirely unique to Dota. In any commercial product, money is always going to be a primary consideration, and this will almost always inevitably lead to compromises in development which hamper the competitive experience. You need look no further than Super Smash Bros. To see what I'm talking about here. The developers of the Super Smash Bros. Games are continually pressured by Nintendo to create a party game which can be enjoyed by everyone, and this has led to a rift between how Sakurai designs his games and what the actual fans of those games want. League of Legends is, no offense to the fans of that game, another example. Riot Games knew they needed to make money off of their product, so they introduced a system of buying the playable characters rather than having them all available from the start. Since the vast majority of the players will only have access to a limited pool of their roster, Riot needs to design a metagame that's at least somewhat viable given any selection of characters that might be available, and this is without a doubt one of the roots of the most common complaint I hear about the game, which is that all of the heroes feel very samey. Baseball was invented when a couple of people picked up a stick and a ball, had some fun throwing it back and forth and hitting it out of the air, and then showed it to their friends, who showed it to their friends, gradually fostering a community of people who would over time create rules and refine the game into something deep and rewarding. The profitability would only come much later. Dota's origins are the same story with new technology and a new coat of paint, and I applaud the integrity of Valve to make every aspect of the game available to the player from out of the gate at no extra charge. Furthermore, there's no persistent progression system of any sort. There's nothing for the player to gain from game to game other than their own personal sense of improvement, and this flies in the face of a game industry which currently seems absolutely obsessed with including these. Dota makes its money entirely off of tournament ticket purchases and cosmetic effects for its characters. Its roots are untouched by capitalism, and with the exception of the now deceased Project M, it continues to be the only esport to my knowledge which can say that about itself. In 2009, IceFrog would be hired by Valve to develop what was titled as a sequel to Dota. This sequel would be everything the fans of the original wanted and then some. All of the original heroes and progress in balancing the game over the last 6 years would be simply ported over to this new game, but this time it would be completely divorced from Warcraft 3, featuring its own heroes and lore which just barely skirt the line of what would be grounds for a lawsuit. But that isn't to say Dota 2 is simply a port of the original. Dota 2 is also a continuation of many of the design philosophies present in Valve's own first competitive venture, Team Fortress 2. Valve did some brilliant work in its design of Team Fortress 2, specifically with respect to the game's characters. They knew that one of the key parts of the original game was making quick decisions based on what classes the player was up against, and so they designed the classes to be as visually distinct from one another as possible. The entire art style of the game was reworked multiple times from the ground up just to satisfy this purpose, and eventually they settled on a cartoony aesthetic featuring characters with exaggerated figures who were recognizable from just their silhouettes. Not only that, the classes themselves weren't just different equipment loadouts. They were each their own characters, and to this day they are some of the most recognizable faces in video games. This helped to further distinguish the classes from one another further, but it also served a second purpose. Each personality was carefully designed to fit the playstyle associated with that class. Listening to the scout laugh his head off, yelling about how much better he is than everyone else in his Brooklyn accent while running around and jumping at box speed, blowing people away at close range with a shotgun just feels perfect. Every character has an extensive amount of dialogue to this end. The soldier is flat out insane, as you'd have to be if your primary means of transportation was shooting a rocket at your own feet. The spy is an aloof asshole, also fitting the playstyle that revolves around stabbing people in the back. The engineer is a calm and collected, slow-talking Texan, perfect for a character who confidently sits back behind his machines and let them do the talking for him. Whatever you're doing in Team Fortress, your character's reactions will be complementary to it. This synergy between playstyle and character helps in a ton of different ways that I'll be getting to shortly, and I firmly believe that it's why the characters of Team Fortress are so beloved to this day and why the game has had so much lasting value up until now. Dota 2's heroes designs are a continuation of this design philosophy. Except where Team Fortress 2 has 9 classes, Dota 2 has 111 heroes available to play at the time of my writing this. Despite this, every character is undeniably distinct and memorable, and Valve managed to accomplish this while at the same time maintaining a consistently dark fantasy art style. I can't even imagine what a massive undertaking it must have been to accomplish this. The heroes in Dota feel like just that, mythical figures who have been ripped out of their own independent stories to participate in some kind of cosmic game, and yet somehow, and I have no idea how, it feels like they could still exist in the same canon space. What I mean by this is that Dota 2 feels like the kind of careful canon crossover that occurs in DC or Marvel's universes, rather than something like, say, Mugen, where you can have the Animaniacs fight to the death with Scorpion. This is accomplished with character models that are extremely varied in size and structure, all of which have their own unique animations not just for their spells, but also for their basic auto attacks, movement, teleporting, and even dying. Not only that, the spells themselves are all extremely distinct from one another, and this is accomplished primarily through some extremely impressive sound design. You can always tell there's an Arc Warden in the game with your eyes closed just by hearing him cast Flux, or spot a faceless void from the tick-tocks of a clock going out of sync when Chronosphere is cast. This is incredibly important in a game like Dota 2, as it means that with practice and familiarity, a player with only a few hundred hours logged into the game can parse enough sense out of a teamfight to make tactical decisions, as opposed to a few thousand hours. Every character has around 15 minutes of recorded dialogue, which is admittedly less than that of the classes from Team Fortress, but not by as much as you would expect. This, by the way, is what initially drew me to Dota 2 among other games of its ilk. Something I personally can't stand in League of Legends, as well as pretty much everything Blizzard has ever made, and something I have never, ever seen criticized, is how often characters repeat themselves with the same 4 or 5 lines of tired dialogue. Blizzard is definitely the worst offender here. Here's how they handle units talking back to you in StarCraft 2.
Raiders roll. You can count on me. Sounds like a plan. Time to man up. You can count on me. Time to man up. Raiders roll. Sounds like a plan. You can count on me. Sounds like a plan. Time to man up. Raiders roll.
Of course, this will only be particularly bad in the levels where you control just the hero units, but in those levels it would always get so annoying that I'd have to turn off voices entirely. Dota 2 avoids this problem gracefully by setting a timer to hero responses. They can only talk back to you with respect to a specific action once every 6 seconds. That's such an absurdly simple solution that it really points out how little thought Blizzard put into their implementation of voice acting in this game that they didn't consider it themselves. Now let's quickly turn to Overwatch and see another example of how Blizzard drops the ball. The heroes in Overwatch might seem at first glance to have just as many lines as the heroes of Dota, but this is deceptive, as many if not most of these voice lines are unlockables or purchasable. This means that in most situations you're still going to be hearing characters say the same tired line every time they use their abilities. Ultimates in that game are particularly grating. Here's the only thing that Soldier 76 says upon using his ultimate. I'll play it as many times as you'll probably hear it in a typical game.
I've got you in my sights. I've got you in my sights. I've got you in my sights. I've got you in my sights.
Now let's look at one of the ultimates of Dota, Earthshaker's Echo Slam. This spell has 4 lines which you can hear normally.
Slammin', 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 Echo Slam.
There are also 2 lines which can be said if he whiffs the spell and hits nobody with it.
Slammin', Echo Slam.
And 1 line when he lands an especially good ultimate that hits 5 or more hero units.
Chaos Dunk.
Earthshaker is 1 hero out of over 100. Soldier 76 is 1 out of 24. The reason this bothers me so much is that Blizzard obviously wants to make their characters appealing and likable, probably even more so than Valve does for the heroes of Dota. They've poured a no doubt absurd amount of money into the production values of their games to this end, but they focus far too much on how their characters look, barely considering how they sound. Dota 2 has set a standard for the implementation of voice acting in these kinds of MOBA-style games, and as that style becomes more popular, I want to see more companies look towards this as the standard rather than the below-minimal one set by League, so that I'm not forced to turn off voice acting in every game I play for the rest of my life. More importantly, and to get back on topic, that synergy between personality and playstyle that was present in Team Fortress 2 is still present here in Dota. Clockwork is a great example of my personal favorite character. His reckless bravado perfectly matches a character who literally hurls himself halfway across the map headfirst into the enemy team, and his sociopathic sense of humor is totally in sync with a character who proceeds to trap his enemies in a caged arena and beat them to death with a blunt instrument.
Malingering. Hello, boys.
Dominating! Double kill!
The techies are another great one. They place mines all over the map, setting up some of the most comedic and/or infuriating deaths in the entire game. I think this is going to be a triple kill for
Here it goes. Mines. Nice.
Suckers.
And now suddenly I have 3,000 gold.
So it's fitting that the characters themselves are essentially a trio of Looney Tunes knockoffs.
Oh, this is gonna be fun.
You can even hear them quietly humming to themselves as they lay down mines, and the melody sounds strikingly similar to the Looney Tunes theme song. Pudge is another interesting case due to how different he comes off to the enemy team, his allies, and the player controlling him. To the enemy team, Pudge is a hero that can have an absolutely terrifying presence in a game, as his abilities allow him to snatch unsuspecting prey away from their team and quickly chop them to little pieces.
Fresh
Dire's
meat!
middle tower is falling.
Monster kill! No! Fresh meat.
As such, his character model is hideous and grotesque, looking like something straight out of a horror movie, and his iconic line upon using his ultimate ability, Dismember, is shouted across the entire map for all to hear. However, to his allies and the player controlling him, Pudge is actually quite amiable and lighthearted.
Hi, hi! Right to it! Ah, good idea.
This works for his allies, since his hook that's so terrifying to enemies can also be used to pull allies to safety and save lives. Most importantly, it works for the player. Pudge's hook is a difficult skill shot to land, and it can be quite embarrassing to mess up multiple times in a row. To reduce a player's embarrassment or frustration, Pudge can be heard cracking jokes and acting silly upon missing his hooks, which subtly encourages the player to keep calm and remember that it's all just a game.
I meant to do that. Bloody creeps!
Dota 2 is a massive undertaking to learn, and having characters whose personalities match their playstyle is a subtle but surprisingly effective way to learn how they work. The unique animations and sounds also work towards this end. Shadow Fiend's exaggerated and bombastic motions make the player feel like a composer conducting their own symphony of violence. And Tinker's frantic robotic motions perfectly fit a character who revolves around pressing as many buttons as possible as fast as possible in preset patterns. Best of all, the characters in Dota are actually treated like just that, characters. You won't find any clone matches in this game. Once one team picks a hero, that hero is picked and unavailable for the other team to select. This creates a sense of individuality among other things. Everyone's playing a unique character with their own capabilities and will have their own unique effect on the game that nobody else can have. Also contributing to this is the fact that the characters all seem to understand that they've been summoned by players to participate in some kind of contest. They all have lore and even talk about themselves at times, but this kind of talk can only be heard while the game is paused and nothing more pertinent is going on. Aside from this, all the comments you hear will reflect in some way what you yourself are thinking about with respect to the game taking place. You and the hero you're playing as are in communication working towards a common goal, and that's all there is to it. All of this contributes not only towards making a game that's more enjoyable to learn, but also more enjoyable to watch. Dota has always been taken seriously by its fans as a spectator sport, and Valve has gone to great lengths to make it watchable to newer players and even those that are unfamiliar. Tournaments can be watched directly inside the game client, with a selection of broadcasters available in multiple languages, and in the larger tournaments there's even often a specific casting of the game directed at people that are new to it. Games can be watched exactly how the player wants to see them. They can give themselves full control over the camera, they can have the casters move the camera around for them, or they can even watch it from a specific player's perspective. By purchasing in-game tickets for tournaments, viewers can even earn cosmetic prizes for witnessing multi-kills or other record-breaking events, making it even more enjoyable. But all of this is just the surface level of what makes Dota 2 so respectable. To see what makes the game itself so marvelous, we're going to have to dissect it a bit. I'm going to proceed by explaining Dota as if nobody has ever heard one of these games before, so we can analyze the effects that these mechanics have independently of any preconceived expectations. Some of this will seem pretty basic to almost all of you, but try to humor me for just a minute. Dota takes place on a single square arena which is symmetric across the diagonal on the macro level, but filled with slight asymmetries on the micro level which add depth and give each side some subtle advantages and disadvantages. Splitting the map across said diagonal is a river, with each side being aesthetically distinct from one another. Dota is a 5-on-5 team-based game where each team presides over one of these two sides, which are named after the aesthetics distinguishing them, rather than good and evil. The lower diagonal is called the Radiant, and the upper diagonal is called the Dire. At each corner of these two sides is a massive building called an Ancient, and the game ends the very second that one of these is destroyed. Protecting the Ancient are 4 layers of smaller buildings called towers, which are essentially turrets which attempt to shoot down enemy units attempting to pass by their territory. These towers propagate outward along 3 different paths called lanes, which eventually meet up with the opposing towers near the middle of the map. Every 30 seconds, a group of units called creeps will spawn at the edge of each of these 3 lanes and run down to eventually meet up and fight the other creeps. These creeps are important because every building in the game has a property called backdoor protection, which causes them to quickly regenerate health upon being damaged. This makes them borderline impossible to destroy, but if a team's creeps move in within a certain proximity of the building, it loses its backdoor protection, allowing it to be brought down. Thus, the overall objective of the game is for the 5-player characters to lead their respective creep waves down the lanes to destroy each tier of towers, eventually making their way to the Ancient to end the game. That is the game in a nutshell. The real depth comes from the heroes, who gain experience and money from killing the enemy creeps, players, and buildings. By doing this, they gain levels which improve their stats and abilities, and items which augment them by adding what are essentially new abilities, which can round out their pre-existing toolkits. Keep in mind that the creeps eventually will be killed off by other creeps even if the players aren't around to reap the rewards. In addition to the creeps in the lanes, both sides of the map are filled with camps of creeps which just sit there and won't die unless a hero comes and kills them. These creeps spawn at fixed locations every minute, and the spawn is based on proximity. If someone runs over to one of these locations close to the minute mark and forces the creeps there to chase them away far enough, they'll stack the creeps there, causing 2 groups to exist at the same location, and this can be done repeatedly. That might have seemed overly technical, but the important takeaway is that the map is filled with resources which, like a normal RTS, need to be farmed efficiently. The stackable camps I mentioned can be viewed as a long-term bank investment, while the creeps running down lanes are an expirable resource which require attention at the same time. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. As I said before, there are currently 111 heroes available to play in Dota 2, and believe it or not, they're all extremely distinct and serve a unique purpose. The way that this is accomplished is through the game design philosophy of everything is overpowered so nothing is overpowered. Dota 2 is a game of extreme, borderline excessive impact. Most heroes have skills that once read and understood seem overpowered to the point of feeling broken. The catch is that these come with heavy speed limiting. Many major skills will have long cooldowns or cripplingly high mana costs, and many characters come with something intentionally missing from their skill set, forcing them to buy a specific item to reach their potential. These kinds of speed limits are by their design gradually taken away with the collection of levels and items, but even from minute 1, this design philosophy makes for a game that could come off to many as looking like a series of curb stomp fights. Those high mana costs and cooldowns actually add to that sense of impact I mentioned, however, because every spell cast in a fight is going to have a major impact on how that fight turns out, and this adds a real sense of weight to the abilities in Dota that I just really haven't experienced elsewhere. It's a game where execution and skill definitely matters, but at the same time takes a backseat to caution, planning, and tactics. In other words, it resembles actual warfare. Where League of Legends is a game full of extended fights, chases, skill shots, and spammable spells, Dota is a game more focused on knowledge, caution, careful positioning, and fights that typically end in a matter of seconds. There's a lot of quiet time in which both teams hide from one another while sizing each other up in smaller skirmishes, and combined with a general escalation of stakes as the game goes on, this creates a sequence of increasingly steep peaks and valleys which make every game of Dota feel like a unique story. There's no surrender option. Teams at their lowest point are forced to experience that low for its full duration. And while that can feel pretty terrible, it also creates opportunities for experiencing some of the most insane comebacks you could possibly imagine. Dota has some very finely tuned comeback mechanics which make comebacks very possible while also staying far away from that feeling of rubber banding present in games like Mario Kart. Eventually players will realize how these comeback mechanics work, and at this point I actually think that the lack of a surrender option serves to foster a general attitude of never giving up, and I'd bet that this actually greatly reduces the amount of griefing Dota has when compared to other MOBAs. There's no real point of griefing in Dota. You're stuck in that shitty game no matter what you do, so you might as well play your best and try to make something of it. In addition to the visible action happening in the foreground, support players on each team wage an invisible information war against one another in a fight over map vision. Fog of War blocks out knowledge of what's happening on parts of the map where there aren't allied units or buildings. Observer wards are invisible items that can be purchased and planted and provide vision anywhere on the map, but these items are a finite resource, restocking only several minutes after being purchased. These wards are invisible, but can be detected by sentry wards, which are a more expensive but infinite resource which doesn't provide vision but does reveal invisible units where there already is vision, allowing teams to take away vision from each other for extended amounts of time, provided they can figure out where the original team placed theirs. Often a game of Dota is decided just by one team having better intel than the other, and I think that this speaks volumes towards what kind of game Dota fundamentally is. So in what ways might heroes differ from one another exactly, and how might you pick heroes to win the game? Well, the objective is to destroy the towers, right? Why not just compose a team of heroes that can immediately start pushing from minute 0 and end the game in the first 15 minutes? That's definitely doable. But it's also risky, because that early game power usually comes at the cost of being overshadowed later by other heroes. Just like there are heroes who are powerful with relatively few levels and items, there's also heroes that scale terrifyingly well with both. What if the opposing team picks these heroes and manages to hold out long enough to turn the tables on you? There are heroes who excel at prolonging the game longer than it should go on, and there are heroes who simply don't stop scaling with farming experience, eventually becoming a nigh unstoppable force. What if the enemy team drafts those kinds of heroes? Well, maybe you'll react by picking heroes that excel at assassinating other heroes, or just generally causing chaos early on, and make sure to continually shut down the dangerous heroes so they never get a chance to become a problem in the first place. But what if the enemy picks heroes like Undying or Disruptor who can capitalize on overly aggressive strategies like that and turn them back on themselves? What if this happens and you end up at a disadvantage? Maybe you see the enemy team picking heroes whose skills combo together in a particularly devastating way and plan to gain an advantage by winning big fights. That's fine, you maybe say in response, because if they group up to start a fight, they leave their own towers exposed. You'll just draft heroes like Nature's Prophet and Clinks, who can quickly move around the map on their own and take these exposed towers, forcing the enemy team to split apart and deal with it and never let them execute their big combos in the first place. Or maybe that sounds like too much coordination and strategy to you. Maybe instead you'll just draft even bigger team fight, etc., etc. Hopefully now you can see from that even though only 10 of the 111 heroes will be used in every Dota game, all of them will have a distinct impact on the game's strategy. The most competitive mode to play Dota is called Captain's Mode, in which both teams take turns picking and banning heroes. The drafting phase is chock full of its own intrigue and suspense, and sometimes the outcome of a game can be more or less decided just from one team out-drafting the other. One team might think their strategy is airtight by banning the major counters only to realize they forgot somebody. Or a team might think they know what the other team is planning only to realize with the last pick that they had it all wrong, because the heroes in Dota tend to be very multifaceted. And from all of this combined, we can maybe finally see what Dota fundamentally is as a game. Dota 2 is an arms race. Both sides compose a team with a strategy in mind, and that strategy will always require a certain amount of levels on their heroes as well as key items. It's about farming the map as efficiently as possible to get your strategy online before the other team is ready, while simultaneously making efforts to prevent the enemy team from doing the same. There's a kill count displayed at the top of the screen, but the real scoreboard is the net worth chart, an invisible figure which viewers can see but the players must infer for themselves. With me doing all this touting of how many heroes Dota 2 has and how different they all are, you might be wondering how viable each hero actually is to use. In other words, how varied is the metagame? Dota 2's metagame is incredibly flexible, to the point that many have argued that the metagame is that there is no metagame. I don't think anyone will disagree with me when I say that as of this most recent international, Dota has by far the most varied and dynamic metagame of any MOBA, and this in my mind is for 3 reasons. Reason number 1 is the lack of mirror matches. Having only one of each hero per game, not just per team, forces teams out of their comfort zone more than other games do, and forces them to experiment with fringe heroes that aren't picked very often, leading to a cycle of hero flavors of the month among the pro scene which is independent of patches. The second and by far most important reason is that the game has been carefully balanced by multiple groups of people for over a decade now. Dota has had ample time to be balanced to an awe-inspiring sheen, and during this last year's biggest professional tournament of the year, the International, 105 of the 111 heroes were picked at least once, and only 16 of these were played in under 5 games, meaning that the vast majority of these heroes got their fair share of screen time. The last reason, though it can barely be called that, is that I look at this as a testament to the hero designs themselves. If the hero idea is unique enough and has an interesting enough effect on the game, then people will find a way to make it competitively viable. Simple as that. And with so many different heroes and so many different ways to build each one, there's a virtually infinite number of these strategies to see and try. It's a game where you can play for 3,000 hours and still see something brand new every game. It's a game about knowledge and prediction, and it's also a game about Twitch reactions, but most importantly, it's a game about making fast decisions in the heat of the moment. It incorporates the very best of what competitive sportsmanship has to offer, and I'm deeply excited to see it continue to develop in the future. Dota 2 is an immense undertaking to take up, and it isn't for everybody. For some, the game is just going to be too stressful to be enjoyable, and others just might not have the time. But I firmly believe that everyone can respect and enjoy Dota as a spectator sport, one that can be imitated but never replicated.